Hello, and welcome to Kaleidoscope, where we share reflections of diverse views on mental health equity. We're very excited to have with us two wonderful guests during Black History Month. We would like to welcome Doctors Deborah Haskins and Carmela Washington-Harvey to the show today. Both of these ladies have incredible experience with regard to culturally relevant mental health services, social justice attuned mental health and wellness programs, and just a great passion around addictions, mental health, and behavioral health. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Deborah Haskins and Dr. Carmela Washington-Harvey. Hello, ladies.
Hello. Hi, Maureen.
Smiling faces today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. Very excited.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the
Great. Well, then let's get right into that conversation. You know, Black History Month is important, but that term history often makes people think that it's about the past. And really, clearly, it's about acknowledging and committing to great efforts and work that we must do every day to break down and eliminate inequities and racism and discrimination, and to celebrate leaders in the Black community who make such a big difference in our lives. So this year, Black History Month is focusing on Black health and wellness, which is so appropriate for our discussions with you. Can you share with us, please, what Black History Month means to you?
Well, I'll
go ahead, Deborah.
Okay. So, Black history is so important. I grew up being raised by a Black mother who taught us our history. And as well as I remember my babysitter, who was an older Black woman who grew up during a very difficult time, both of these women. And so Black history has always been a focus in my early years of childhood. And as I moved into adulthood, I continued to learn about my Black history because unfortunately, Black history wasn't something that was integrated in the school system. And so unless you were being taught by your family members and in many folks like myself who grew up in the church, Black history is also a very important part that's weaved in a regular, ongoing, consistent way. So Black history is important. Black history for me is not just during the month of February, it's every day, year round, 365, 24/7. And so what I try to do is to help people in terms of mental health wellness and healing to understand the history, but also understand what are the connections and how are they relevant today? Because when you get right down to it, unfortunately, there have been some changes, but there haven't been some changes. So.
Well, I want to add to that and just share briefly about my experience. I was raised with both of my parents within the home, and I was raised in a Catholic environment. And what I found, we had a strong sense of community, and we wanted to make sure that our experience and our connections with people were grounded in the pride in our history. But having said that, in my educational experience, until actually I got to college, I didn't have much in terms of formal awareness of our history and our heritage and what was brought by our people that in our community. Now, fortunately, I did know my parents did have, and we had relatives that were contributors in major ways in the community, or we were able to even meet others. Now, my time, I grew up and I was in that group where we were marching and going out for civil rights and looking at justices and everything. And that really shaped, and we pushed a curriculum we push for information, we push for acknowledgement of our heritage and our roots within the curriculum itself. Now, having said that, we were also pleased because I was one of the first groups that were hired in a major insurance company in Los Angeles. They marched and then they brought a group of us in to work. And that was a remarkable experience. And so I consider my experience has been somewhat trailblazer, but also pushing the envelope and pushing it. And I'm sad to say, I'm concerned with where we are right now in terms of Black history, in terms of attitudes towards any celebration of diversity, not just Black history. So I am hoping that conversations like this will really inspire people and encourage people and let us all know that we are not alone and not become or continue to be complacent.
Wow, incredible stuff. I think some of the things you both just said, that respect for lived experience is so crucial for people to understand the sense of community. And let's talk a little bit just about terminology, because, we talk Black History Month or we talk African American History Month. We know there's no one picture of what that looks like, but this is really a beautifully diverse set of communities that are made up of individuals from different parts of the world. So can you help us understand how we can respect those terms, Black, African American? How do we use them? How do we understand them?
Well, I'd like to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Dr. Carmela.
Okay. What I'd just like to say is that back in the day when I was growing up, that my parents didn't like us using Black. They didn't want us to be Black. And not that they didn't want us to be Black, they just thought that term was disrespectful to our communities. And in where I grew up, and I didn't grow up in the South, my parents were from the South. And so, but I didn't grow up, and we grew up in Los Angeles area. So they thought Negro was a respectful term to use. And if you look at lots of literature that has documented our experience, you notice that there are terms that they use the word Negro. And then we see interchangeably between Black and Negro, and now we're African American. And so more African American. But what I'm trying to get at here by making this comment is that I think is how you define it as an individual. And we need to respect each other's views when it comes to that. We have Latino. I always ask my clients when they come in to see me, how do you identify yourself? I'm not going to pigeonhole them. I want to know how they see themselves. And so that is what I think the cornerstone of what I'm trying to say is that you really need to respect the person's desire and don't assume how they want to be identified as.
Yeah. And thank you. Dr. Carmela has explained it really well. And it really depends. And I'm glad, Maureen, you're asking that question, because it really depends on how you were raised, where you were raised. It depends on the generational influence. So if you talk to older adults that are African descent, they may refer to themselves as Black or Negro. They may there was a lot of resistance when there's been shifts in racial identity. There hasn't been total agreement within the Black culture and Black community, because everyone has a different experience, and how they identify may vary because of that. And so we do need to ask. I think the other important part of this is I tend to use the term for myself, African descent. And the reason that I do that, that's intentional because I'm acknowledging that I descended from Africa. And my peoples descended from Africa. We were brought here involuntarily and as slaves. And so as I tried to discover more of my history and my cultural background, I wanted to align myself more with Africa. But not everyone who is in United States of America who are African descending will identify in that way. The other part of it is that we have a lot of sisters and brothers who are not born in the United States. They are from the West Indies, they are from the continent of Africa, and they don't have any understanding necessarily of the American experience. They may identify ethnically in terms of what tribe they're from, what country, and don't make a mistake. For example, if you're from Jamaica, someone's from Jamaica, and you think you make the mistake in error and refer to them as a Trinidadian. I mean, that could be insulting. I mean, because they have such national pride culturally and ethnically that they want to be associated. So it does behoove us to just ask the question. And what I do in preparing my students and trainees and supervisees is I tell them to standardize a question in the same way Dr. Carmela mentioned, is to just start with asking the client, how do you identify? What's meaningful for you in terms of your social identities? How do you identify either racially and culturally? What are the intersections of that? Mm-hmm. And then the individual can let us know.
I think that's very, very much. So
I really appreciate what you're saying, because some people don't want to be identified. They don't trust you enough to know what their identity is. And so and I'm saying you, Maureen, but I'm just saying you as part of the dominant culture, may not get the truth from people, how they feel, because there's this whole dynamic of trust, and we have to work on that. And so when it comes to the work that I do, I find that I may not always get everything I'm wanting to know from a client initially when they come in, and that as I am working with them more, their comfort and trust increases, so I'm able to get the foundation that I need. And one of the things I like about the DSM-5, which is our diagnostic manual, I don't want to get too technical, is that they're now recognizing the fact of diversity, and they're trying to give us a platform and an understanding of how we treat our clients. What are the key issues that we have? And what are things that we want to know? Because I know we're getting more into this later, but I'm just saying it's very critical. So we have to be mindful of these things in people, and how do we build rapport? And don't feel because a person tells you one thing at this juncture that they're being intentionally dishonest to dupe you. Maybe it's just they don't trust you.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's key. So we're going to get into that right now. I think this background of mistrust that comes from both historical and current, let's be real here, current experiences of racism and discrimination that contribute to that mistrust, both of the healthcare system in general in Western society and specifically to mental health services. So what do we need to understand, and how do we need to help work through that with members of the community?
Yeah, I like what Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin, and she discusses this really well in her book Black Families in Therapy. And her original book is 1989, but then it was updated in probably 2000, I don't know, early 2000s. But what she discusses a lot, as well as many folks clinically, and as well as the folks who are writing about this, talks about the mistrust that has developed from systemic racism throughout history. And so, because the reality is, it's not just the history, as you started out with the question, it's still present day, that people who are Black, who are of African descent, or have Blackness, or Black and brown people, are not really able to move and be in the world freely, if they, based on the color of their skin. And so, because of that, it would be different if things had changed and history happened, and then present day, we see more respect racially and culturally, but that's not the truth. We see people are dying every day as a result of racism and social injustice. And so there's a strong mistrust. And because people don't feel that they can trust the world, then they're really hesitant. And a big part of that is not, a psychological issue. It's called cultural safety, that people are going to do whatever they have to do to protect themselves, protect their children, their family members, and protect members in their community. And so, it used to be historically, like even in the DSM, there was all this issue and thinking about cultural paranoia. But what we have understood is cultural paranoia is actually a stress coping strategy. Is I might appear to be paranoid or suspicious, but I'm not paranoid in a psychological or pathological way. It's a way for me to protect myself and to protect the people that I love and care about. And so we are having to educate, like practitioners, for example, to understand that, and to understand why, as Dr. Carmela said in the beginning, initially when you're forming a relationship, people may not really open up as well because of the cultural mistrust. And until they feel, as I said, that they can trust their heart and their spirit and their mind with you, because going back to slavery, words were used and said, and promises were made, and there was incongruency. Your actions didn't match how you treated the slave person. You killed them, you beat them, you raped their wives and their sisters and their daughters, for example. And so, because of that incongruency, many people who are Black and brown don't trust the spoken word. Instead, what they do immediately is we scan the environment to assess very quickly, is this a relationship and is this an environment that I can trust? And until I feel that I can do that from my assessing and evaluating that pretty quickly, I'm not going to open myself up to be harmed or to be hurt.
I'm going to add to what she's saying in this subject as well. What I find that racism definitely contributes to the mistrust. Absolutely. I want to make sure we understand that. And it plays out in many ways. Using tests, psychological testing, or other forms of testing to evaluate illness, mental health issues can be very, very detrimental to our clients. And we're being misdiagnosed with issues that are not present, truly present. And we're basing it on testing that is used to have been developed often with the dominant culture experience. And I'll give you an example. I do testing quite a bit, and I do evaluations quite a bit when it comes to mental health, and also when it comes to capacity to parent. And what I'm saying to you, if I look at a test and the questions on the test, now not all of them, but they're not relatable to the experiences of our clients, you are not going to get accurate information.
Mhm.
That's why I'm present when my clients are taking these tests. First of all, I don't give them unless I absolutely
Mhm.
have to, and I depending on levels, there's complications here
Yeah.
in how to use these tests. But I will not use tests that do not reflect to some reasonable degree the experience
Mhm.
of my clients, period, point blank.
Mhm.
And when we find that individuals are using these tests or they're making assumptions based on the test results without taking into consideration the experiences or possible experiences of their clients, they're missing the
Mhm.
boat. I see it every time, and I'm not happy about it. Obviously, it's painfully hurtful to
Mhm.
see that. So I just wanted to add that, and we're not only talking about that,
Mhm.
but we're also talking about when person comes into your office, if they feel that their experience has been misinterpreted,
Mhm.
and they may not even know it, then that is causing a huge amount of disconnect, misdiagnosis,
Mhm.
and it affects your futures because, as we all know, test results don't go away.
Mhm.
They stay there. They don't pull them out. They stay there. And so I will always tell people when you have tests, I'm not telling them to lie, but they need to know that these test results follow them.
Mhm.
So you need to be mindful to say, well, at this time in my life, these things were happening. And
Mhm.
this is why I was reacting or acting. But now this is where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Carmela, because one of the things that we all know happens is even when you look at the prevalence rates of certain uh, syndromes and disorders,
Mm-hmm.
the diagnoses of these far exceeds just even the prevalence in the general population. So we know
Right.
that racism is contributing to mental health assessments and overdiagnosis, and it really reinforces why people in the community don't trust mental health because they know that there's harm being done, and so they don't want to participate in anything that's going to continue down that line.
Mm-hmm.
So, something you said there was really important. The effects of whether it's research, whether it's socioeconomic issues that disproportionately affect communities of color. One of those has been and is still with us the COVID-19
Mhm.
pandemic. We have all been affected. It's had an effect on our mental health as well, but certainly disproportionately affecting people of color, particularly Black and Latinx
Mhm.
communities. So, what's being done or can be done to get a better understanding that will support better services around this
Mhm.
issue?
I've been really upset. I'll just be honest to start in the beginning of COVID pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I was very upset for a number of reasons. One is that a lot of the focus in terms of public health appropriately was, to get vaccinated and to wear your mask. But there was a lack of understanding and a lack of leadership, I felt, in a lot of ways, where the Black community and other Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities were basically being sort of held responsible for the solutions. We know that in the Black community, what we're seeing with COVID-19 is actually being referred to as the new genocide of the Black community. And why is that? Is that because the deaths are one of the highest in terms of minority populations. The Black community is one of the highest. Latinx is the next, and then we have other Indigenous Native Americans being right after that. And so we know that there's a disproportionate we know that health disparities are disproportionately affecting these Indigenous communities and Black and Brown communities. And so the reality is that prior to COVID, we had health disparities. But then when COVID hit, I love what one of my colleagues said, Dr. Diane Reese said, COVID-19 opened the curtains wide open to the disparities because we were hiding behind not even the curtain, but the draperies. We were basically able to hide behind these draperies and pretend that health disparities wasn't happening and that people had health equity and access to opportunities for wellness and healing. But then the racial injustice turning point with George Floyd's and all the other Black men and Black and Brown and women and men and who were dying, unfortunately and sadly and traumatically, we could no longer hide. We also know that social determinants of health from birth predicts about 80% of a person's future possibilities. And so when COVID happened, this message of just wear masks, like I'll say where I am in Baltimore, Maryland, what I wasn't seeing was I wasn't seeing access to helping the community in the way at the grassroots level that it needed to happen quick enough. It was sort of the messaging, which could be a message that if you're middle class, if you're from the dominant if you're white and say middle class economically across all sort of races and cultural identities, you would be in a better position possibly to function. So in terms of COVID, what happens is that people have these chronic health conditions prior to COVID. Then COVID happened. And so the reason why people are dying quicker is not just that they may not be vaccinated, but the reality is that when they had COVID, even if they had the vaccine, that the chronic conditions put them at the greater risk that led to death. And so the question is, what are we doing to improve the well-being of these communities that are struggling every day from poverty, higher rates of crime? And you can't really talk about crime until you address poverty. We have a high rate of the mass incarceration of Black men. We have gentrification in communities where communities are being torn apart and people are being displaced, and a little bit of money is being thrown at them. And they don't realize that that money isn't really going to help them in the long haul because many of them suffer from material poverty. And so they take the money and run, and then they're still left with the same conditions if say a community is gentrifying. But we see that in many communities that are Black and Brown, we have higher rates of childhood adversity, but we have high rates also of community adversity. But the community adversity didn't just happen like crime and poverty. Child adversity didn't just happen. The child adversity and family adversity has happened because the roots of the tree in the community is disease, where you have poverty, where you have economic, limitations. You have lack of access to opportunities like the better schools, good education systems, opportunities for work. You don't have the same equitable opportunities for transportation. So a person may need to take 3 buses to get to their job that doesn't pay a livable wage. And so they never are able to come out of poverty. So all of those risk factors have influenced why COVID has been a real challenge. The other part of this is that honestly, many Black persons don't trust science. So, because of systemic racism in science, science has hurt Black people. And so, people aren't just rushing to get the vaccine because they don't trust science. They know that during the Tuskegee experiment, that Black men didn't get the treatment they needed just so that they could, for the sake of knowledge benefits. And they also know, like here in Baltimore, the Henrietta Lack story, where her cells, she has cervical cancer, and Johns Hopkins didn't basically took her, her cells, and there's, folks have benefited economically, and the family was never knowledgeable that that was happening, and they weren't even given the money that they are entitled to for all the landmark scientific breakthroughs that are still continuing today. So you have this history, even including to today, as Maureen's question started out, where people know that they can't trust science. And so they're willing to take a risk. It's almost like the gambler. I'm really willing to gamble, because I don't see the data when I look out in the world every day and I'm trying to breathe and support my family. I don't see that anything is changing, so I'd rather take the risk.
I couldn't agree with you more. I really appreciate, Dr. Deborah, what you have said. And I'm going to give you another perspective of that. The seniors that I've spoken to in the Black community, and even in some of the whites, have said to me, I've heard it from different courses, that is genocide against us. They want to wipe our generation out so that economically the country would be sounder. I mean, they would not have us as a burden to figure out. And you notice I'm saying us because I claim who I am. And so if they don't have to pay you Social Security benefits and retirement benefits, then that frees up the thing. The economics there. You have more money to do whatever it is you feel you need to do. So I've heard that. And people they've been either not willing, adamantly not willing to take this vaccine. I have never, ever seen anything like this in my entire life. We had a polio vaccine. We've had smallpox vaccine. I remember when the polio vaccine came out. They came out to the schools and were injecting us. There was no hesitancy about that because we saw people's lives being either destroyed or, it was a huge thing. I remember that very vividly, and I was very young at that time, but I can recall that. I don't get this, even though, but then I think, well, the whole notion of trust is key here. This is what we're talking about. This is what Dr. Deborah said in her eloquent way of putting this. It is trust, and it's always been trust. And we have studies here in our county, King County, that talks about how African Americans feel that they are not treated in the same way. They may have the insurance, they may have the access, but the level of care is different. That's been documented by their experiences. So what can we do to strengthen it? Well, we have COVID. We need to go out in the communities. And I know here in our county, King County, they're making every effort to get the word out. They're working with church groups. They're doing many things to get this. We have wonderful relationships. There's lots of support and talk about self-care and how to do that. And now this is what we need. But we also have to look at who's delivering the message. So the message has got to be diverse. It can't just be from the media. It can't just be from the dominant culture doctors and nurses. I'm not saying they can't be part of it, but people need to see themselves somewhere. If I go anywhere to any organization, you know what I do? I look to see how many people in there look like me or close to looking like me. And that tells me a lot. So this is how I think we need to move forward, is developing those trusts, making sure we have people that are qualified and compassionate. And when I say that too, I want to make this clear. I've been fortunate. I have worked with people from the dominant culture that I know are compassionate. I know they want to do a good job. So I don't want people to feel that this is not possible. But what I'm saying is we need to see us in your staffs. We need, if you want the message to be trusted, you got to have some messengers that look like the people.
Yeah.
Which leads right into my next question, because we know that, yes, there are compassionate people in the field, but we also know that based on some of that mistrust of science, based on the inequities and the challenges, just getting people into the educational system to pursue degrees in advanced degrees. I mean, you are both PhDs, you're both doctors. We don't see that level very often. So we're fortunate to have you with us. But even at a master's degree level, even at a bachelor's degree level, counselors, we don't see enough diverse representation there. And people do want to trust that they're going to have somebody who understands their lived experience who's going to be helping them. What can we do from the very early stages of education to help start making a change there so we see more people of color in the mental health field?
Yeah, I think that's go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, well, what I was going to say, I really want to be able to say this. It is a pipeline issue. And when you look at the educational pipeline, you have to realize that you start preparing children at a very early age. So we don't leap in high school and feel they're going to be ready to go to college. We need to make sure that the educational experience is quality there and is understanding of the different needs of all their students. And in California, where I'm originally from, the diversity of the population, we saw that coming. We knew that we were going to have little brown and Black children that were coming to the universities eventually. And our issue, we knew because we had no choice. I mean, they're there. And when you have many people that are coming through, you can't ignore them. So we knew that was going to be our issue. So we did have education. We did work very hard on that. We worked with the parents. And when I was coming up, there was no option. We were going to college. It was part of the expectation of our parents that we were going to go to college, at least where I was raised. But the access and the financial burden of college is another thing that we need to support as much as we can with our students and their families and parents. And I haven't been in education for a few years now, but what I do know is that we're back to the whole notion of quality of the educational experience and how
Mhm.
different it is for our minority population. And yes, she and I, Dr. Deborah and I, we're of a small minority within
Mhm.
the higher education
Yeah.
field. We know that.
Mhm.
We know that. And we know that how difficult it
Yeah.
is to navigate even the experience
Mhm.
of college. So here again, we have to prepare people for that and be
Yeah.
supportive of that. And if we're not going to do it, we're going to continue to see fewer people
Mhm.
advancing. You know, I have a lot of friends that have got to the point of all but dissertation because they
Mhm.
couldn't reach that
Yeah.
hurdle of writing that dissertation
Right.
because it's a very political process. So we
Yeah.
need to look at those things
Right.
and figure out and navigate, help people navigate.
Yeah, and I thank you, Dr. Carmela. I think another important idea is to uh, provide opportunities for education in the community.
Oh,
I worked at a university that had a strong social justice mission, and what was very attractive for me when I interviewed was that they actually taught the first 2 years of courses towards an AA degree in
mhm,
the community. They established a
mhm,
relationship with the community, and used a facility that they renovated and actually rented out space to actually offer courses for people to attend that college the first 2 years right in their community. And I think that is the level of what would be helpful, because for a
mhm,
lot of people who are struggling in life, they may be working jobs just to, survive, and they don't have the ability to take their limited resources economically, let alone time, to travel over here to even go to, say, a state school or the community college. But if it's more accessible in the community, then they have more opportunities. Another
mhm,
big issue that really is challenging is that the cost of education is so expensive that for a lot of people, they don't see the benefit of getting the graduate degree to be in mental health. They may have a desire to help people in their community, and to help people heal in the world, but when they look at the cost, so I think that's another issue that is more like related to policy, that we've got to make education more economically feasible for people so they're not saddled with a high debt. I know one of my mentees who's in debt for $500,000, for example. And this person will never make enough money to pay that debt back. And actually, I wish that I had been consulted during that process, because I would not have encouraged this individual to actually take on that level of debt. But
mhm,
that's one of the big reasons why people don't want to enter the field. But I do think one way that we can encourage them is that there are lots of different health practitioner uh, programs that can get you started in the field, and then you can make a really good income, and then have a plan to maybe get some additional education. So I worked for 9 years before I went for my doctorate. And and so that was a strategic plan. And then I worked full time and paid for my doctorate. So I think like mentoring can help increase, that's what I do. And I'm sure Dr. Carmela does this, but I have a lot of mentees that, someone recently that is entering the field just started a doctoral program, and I'm mentoring that person to help problem solve and to have also the support along the way.
So I think this is really important. We keep coming back to that sense of limited resources and high costs. And I think that economic inequality, and let's just call it poverty in many cases, has had important impacts not only on access to funding and services and education, but the important one about keeping families together, which has its impacts as well, because women are the heads of households in roughly 3 times more homes in Black and African communities than in white communities. So, how does that impact the need for mental health services for women of color?
Thank you. That's a really good question, and I definitely I'm learning from Dr. Carmela too, perspectives. But we have to understand that we have had systems of white supremacy, to be honest, that didn't want Black families to be together. And when you think about it, some of those policies that have been a function of white supremacy and the systems of policy decision making that, if you say you were a teenage mom and you didn't, you couldn't, you weren't working, you were a teenage mom. Well, in order to get social service benefits, you couldn't have your partner still be in the household. And that still exists, like even today, that the social system policies don't support Black men and women being in the family, say even if they're not married. And so if we really cared about the Black family, we would try to look at changing policies that would promote keeping families together, provide the resources as many nonprofits are doing. I love nonprofits because what we care about, advocacy, and we care about wellness and the hearts and minds of the people at the grassroots level. And so you have a lot of wonderful nonprofits that are focused on helping families, restoring families, providing couples who are not even in a married relationship, but they have a child, providing them communication skills, parenting skills, helping them with relationship skills so that they can co-parent or that they can stabilize even in their relationship, to raise this child or children together. And so, it's been really challenging because of many of those reasons that have existed for too long. And it still hasn't changed completely because we still have these systems that have not changed. They still dated systems and frameworks that don't support Black families. And that's a function of systemic racism. And we know that. And we've got to dismantle these systems that are not promoting Black families. And like what I would love, and this is what I always talk about, I would love in so many different like systems for us to just like throw it out and let's just start from scratch. And let's build up new systems that make sense for people who are culturally diverse, people who are needing access and equity, and let's build new systems. But instead, what we kind of do, we keep the system and we just add, kind of like optional services or other services. We don't really change the system at its core. And so I would like to see more change there, more innovation that would actually change the systems. I think once we can do a better job with that in rebuilding these systems to promote Black families, then we're going to see changes with relationships healing, children being able to grow up in family systems where they have access to both their mothers and their fathers. That's just one perspective I have.
I couldn't agree with you more in that. And I had the privilege of going to South Africa a few years back and looking at what happened when apartheid fell apart. And we were asked to go as part of a study group, a delegation from the US, a few of us. And what I found was that the systems remain in place that actually moves people along educationally and access. Those systems are still there. And maybe not now as much, but we have to, you're right, we have to tear it down. We have to tear them all down and build back up again with people that are aware, that are sensitive, that realizes. But let's say we can't do that. Let's be realistic. We may not be able to. Well, we need to look at how we use these systems with our families. Because I know that there is difference in service delivery. And I will just say it. I've seen it over and over again. If we had a woman that, a nun actually, recently in the news, that stole money from her school or church where she was working. She only got a year in prison. I can't help but feel if that were a Black woman, that she probably would have got 10 to 15 years. And I think I'm being kind when I say that. So I'm looking at the application of what's out there, the equity of that experience, and the sensitivity. Now, I'll take it even further. We have programs, I know in my county and throughout our state, that are working on issues that and providing quality services for Black families and grandparents that are raising grandkids, and just a number of things that they're doing. But guess what? They don't have enough resources to expand these programs that are proven to be working with our families. And there is a lot of competitiveness in what's out there in terms of resources. I think we need to have more services related around trauma, trauma specifically, childhood trauma that can be intergenerational. We need to look at looking at better self-care, because people know they have high blood pressure or diabetes, but they may not be taking their meds. So I'm thinking, if we have a COVID situation and you're not taking your meds, you've upped your chances for death and very complicated illnesses. So we need to look at self-care. We need to look at those areas. And I agree with you, Dr. Deborah. I think how to have relationships with individuals, how to relate effectively with your partners. But I see that across the board. It's not only with our family. But I do feel that we have not been encouraged to stay as a family unit overall, because what were they doing? They expected their maids to be with the family almost 24/7. They had limited access, but those mothers figured it out. We had lots more family support, but it certainly was a struggle. And we know the pressures of making a living creates a great deal of stress and mental angst, which contributes to diabetes, high blood pressure, and other illnesses. So we need to look at providing support, emotional, mental support for our families, not only financially, but those things
Yeah.
so the burden is eased within those populations.
Absolutely. And I think that the resiliency there is something to celebrate, even while there are so many challenges still ahead. But Debbie, I want to give you the last word here as we close out today. I want to thank both of you. You are women of honor. You are women of passion who work
Thank
hard
you.
to help others. And I admire so much the fact that both of you devote a lot of your efforts to thinking outside of the box, to making sure that there are new ways to look at things. So, Deborah, can you end us on maybe a bright, celebratory note? What's the positive? We've talked about a lot of challenges, but what are the positives out there that we can celebrate and look to for a better future?
Yeah, thank you so much, Maureen and Dr. Carmela. I think what I want us to celebrate is that we're strong people. We come from strength. We have endured slavery, including modern day slavery. We have come through the battlefield historically, and we are fighting on the battlefield, including today. But because we are a strong people, we are people that love each other, and we love even others who don't necessarily take care of us in the right ways. But we have been a peoples that have focused on love, respect, resiliency, and strength. We have so many communal strengths. We are people of spirit. We are people of great minds. We are people who are willing to even forgive when others are not even worthy of forgiveness, oftentimes. We are people that love our children, we love our families, we love our community. And we are people also that have at the core a spiritual center that has helped us survive so much. And so, because of all the strengths that we have, we are survivors. We are survivors. We are resilient. And if we can continue to take care of ourselves and each other and our community in the ways that we have always done, and we can even do better jobs moving into the future to take care of each other and take care of our community, which is a central core value in Black families and in Black culture and Black communities, then I think we're going to continue to live. So we're not alone. We have each other. Find people in the world that will help us to breathe, but we already have a lot of strengths that are going to help us in our breathing. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you both,
Well
and look
said.
forward to working
Thank
with
you.
you long into the future to strengthen services and get your guidance and wisdom. So thank you, everyone, for your time today, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.